Mick Lynch, Transport Workers General Secretary, is the worst nightmare of media interviewers and politicians. Impeccable working class credentials. They like to denounce anyone on the left as a bourgeois lovey after all. Principled, a thorough grasp of detail. Calm under fire, but doesn't take any nonsense. Unafraid to turn the table. That's why, in part, he's become such a sensation. But above all else, he struck a chord because after 13 years of austerity, an unprecedented squeeze in living standards, driven, of course, by falling real wages, as well as an onslaught on the welfare state, collapsing public services, we could go on. There's a sense of, well, at least someone's standing up and fighting back rather than just sitting there and getting kicked in the teeth repeatedly without saying a word. Now, he was on LBC this week, and he takes on here a classic argument that often comes up, which I also want to challenge myself, but let's just hear from the big guy himself.
And do you support the strikers?
No, I don't. Not
Tell
at
Mr.
this
Lynch why.
time. We are in such a critical state in this country. We've got, I think they would say 3 million visits to food banks in the past year. This government is on its knees. We've had 13 years of pigs in the trough, as far as I'm concerned. This government are done. So I don't see what's the point in trying to do anything with this government when they are a lame-duck government.
Well, they're trying to nail us. They're trying to nail us to the floor. All the things that you've mentioned are things that we campaign on as RMT, and I campaign on. We don't want food banks in this country. We want people to be earning a living. Now we've got working poverty is a massive phenomenon in this country, and that's because wages have been continually driven down, not just in this last 3 or 4 years of economic woe with the pandemic, but over a period since 2008 when the Osborne-Cameron government gave in. Austerity is driving people into the mire, into destitution in some places, even while they're at work. That's what we're campaigning against. We don't want our members to go down that slope. Many people are now contracted out, outsourced, no conditions, no pensions, no sick pay, wages that are barely meeting the statutory provisions. We want fair wages and we want a square deal for everyone. And we're not going to get that by just surrendering to what public opinion or what the Daily Mail thinks or what the Telegraph thinks. They want lower wages. While that's been happening, profits are up. The super rich have never been richer, and they've never been as broad a category. People are making vast amounts of money out of this economy, while the majority are suffering. That's what we're campaigning against.
Now, this really gets to the heart of what the Tories try and do, divide and rule, which is to try and turn struggling people against each other. So this idea of why are you fighting, while you're going on strike for better wage and all the rest of it, there are people at food banks in this country. Now, what the Tories have tried to do in their 13 years of attacking public services, attacking the welfare state, attacking people's conditions, is to make people feel like they're in a fight for scarce resources and to turn people who are struggling against each other. So to turn private sector against public sector workers, to turn non-unionised workers against unionised workers, to turn the unemployed against those in work, to turn those born here against migrants. It's very dramatic thunder in the background here, which I think is adding to the atmosphere of the horror of Conservative rule. At the heart of what they try to do is to tell people, you've been mugged, so instead of being angry at being mugged, you should be angry at your neighbour who hasn't been mugged quite as much as you have. And it's this idea of a kind of race to the bottom, that there are people who are worse off and therefore you should be happy with your lot and accept being kicked in the teeth because it could be worse. Now, what the RMT and unions try to do is to try and drag people up. So people sometimes go, well, X, Y or Z unionised worker is paid this amount of money. Why are they going on strike without connecting the two? Because it's the facts that workers who do take industrial action are more likely to be able to drag up their wages. In fact, the research suggests that non-unionised workers themselves benefit from unionised workers taking action, because what happens is bosses, for fear of those unionised workers, lift other wages as well. So you get a union premium that doesn't just apply to unionised workers. But the point is rather than say, well, actually, X is worse off than you should say, well, actually, we're going to fight to improve everyone's wages, terms and conditions, instead of accepting this race to the bottom. It's interesting because the Tories often go on about the politics of envy, don't they? Oh, you envy rich people, blah, blah, blah. When actually the argument is rich people gain their wealth through the collective effort in large part of other people, and therefore that wealth should be more evenly distributed. It's not envy or jealousy. In this case, workers who are better off often are in that condition because they fought back, they organised, and the principle is to apply that elsewhere. That's the basis of trade unionism. Now, it's interesting too, because you always get this attack on trade unions, the biggest democratic movement in the country, representing over 6 million workers, who have elected leaders. Very important point to make this, because you often hear union fat cats, union bosses. Bosses aren't elected, union leaders are. Let's just hear, actually, Mick Lynch take this on, because I think it's a very important point.
This person is called Rachel. Will you ask Mick Lynch, I've been losing money during these 12 months of strike. How much has he lost? Mick Lynch.
Well, yeah, I thank all our members for their commitment to the cause. I donate my salary when there's a strike on in this national dispute, and I haven't had a pay rise since I've been General Secretary. I've forgone any pay rise.
How long have you been General Secretary, Mr. Lynch?
I'm going into my third year now, and I haven't had a pay rise since I took the job. In fact, I cut the General Secretary's salary
So
by 20%.
Okay. Do you lose money then, as Rachel asks? She says she does. You
I
do.
give up. I and the other national officers give up our salary on strike days.
Okay. And
See, that's the point. You see, unions are democratically run. Mick Lynch is accountable to his members. They can kick him out if they're not happy with his performance, or they think he pays himself too much. Of course, he slashed his wages, and what he's showing there is, rather than being a kind of out of touch union bureaucrat, he's trying to connect his own conditions with those of the workers that he represents and champions, including by forfeiting a day's pay when they take strike action. Now, another key point, which he also made, is about the role of the government.
when did you last meet with Mark Harper, the Transport Secretary?
I think somebody asked me the other day. I think it was January, so it's a good 5 or 6 months when they thought they would get us to put that stuff to a referendum. It's been radio silent since. More important than that, the employers tell me that the government's not talking to them either. In the employers' contracts in these talks, it says explicitly the Secretary of State is responsible for industrial relations. He tells them what they can say, he sets their mandate, and he tells them what they have to do during the dispute in terms of what services they run and all that. They haven't spoken to each other for 4 or 5 weeks.
This is a really important point, because what the Tories are trying to do is make an example of workers like the RMT who go on strike and fight back, because they know that if the RMT succeed in improving terms and conditions and wages, that will then encourage other workers to do the same. And they don't want that to happen. The people who bankroll the Conservatives don't want that to happen either. So the whole point is pour encourager les autres, as the French expression goes. You make an example as best you can of a high-profile dispute. So what that means in practice is rail chaos for millions of people. Because rather than, with the government paying huge amounts of money in order to subsidise rail companies through disputes, rather than just paying making sure that there's a good settlement, which can end it on good terms and enable the service to work properly. And that's what this is about. It's in large part the Conservatives being class warriors. They want to smash the organised working class in order to make an example. And, we've suffered the consequences of that. The reason, in large part, one of the big reasons we've suffered such a steep decline in wages and the cost of living crisis in practical terms began years before the financial crash. 4 years before the financial crash, the wages of the bottom half had begun to stagnate, and of the bottom third begun to decline. And if you don't, and that was under a Labour government, shamefully, if you don't have strong unions which can represent and fight for workers and make bosses think, well, I better pay them better wages, otherwise I'm going to suffer industrial action, then the bosses think, well, I've got no incentive to improve their terms and conditions and their wages. And then you get a race to the bottom. And so this is why this dispute is so important, because if it encourages other workers to fight back, then we can improve other people's wages, terms and conditions. That means less personal debt, which is bad for the economy. It means less money spent on in-work benefits. What Mick Lynch is doing here is showing leadership. He's showing, actually, this is not just in the interest of those transport workers, like those on the railways, it's in the interest of all workers. And that's why I think we're lucky to have Mick Lynch, great communicator. But it's up to all of us to make the case. So let's do it. Please like, subscribe, and do support us on patreon.com/IJoseFootball. I'll see you in a bit.